OCI, Orange County Inspections, is glad to present the Quality Control and Quality Assurance Seminar, segment number 5. The topic of this segment will be the last rule of the project flowchart, which are the approved drawings. With drawings, we will take a closer look at the basic tools and steps needed to navigate for finding answers to many questions that come up during any project. The first tool that will be covered are the general notes and details. As you will see, these areas hold tremendous amounts of information. Next, we move into the 3 different views that are needed for understanding the 3 dimensions of any project. And lastly, we look at the specific details. This is where the information for that individual category is found. We move into topic number 1, general notes. With the theme of the seminar being structural steel, we will be focusing on the drawings that cover that category closer. So, with any category of the construction industry, you first must be using the correct set of drawings, and to verify that, look at the bottom right corner and find a letter before the page number. As we see here, the letter S stands for structural, and if there was an A or an E or a P or M before this page number, they would represent architectural, electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. So if you need to find an electrical panel and you find yourself in the structural drawings, the chances of finding the correct panel will not be so good, and definitely more frustrating. Staying with this call out, you also see the page number, which is 1.0. Notice here the index for the structural drawings. Let's take a better look at the index. Here is the call out for the general note page we are reviewing. Now, the typical details are the next in the series of sheets, and notice the page numbers, S1.1 through S1.3. Notice the different levels or floors of this project. Here is a sub-basement, the lower level, first level, second level, third level, the fourth level, and the roof level. Here are the sheets that cover the foundation details. Moving up to the other side of the screen, we see the GFRC details, and then the framing details. Then we see the structural steel frame elevation sheets. Now we have typical moment frame column sheet. Right after that are the non-frame column schedule sheets. Again, we have steel details. And as we get to sheet 7.1, we have elevator details, stair framing sheets, and we close with equipment details. The next section of the sheet that provides a large amount of information is the right side boxes of the sheet. Now, to protect the innocent, we blanked out the information that was provided for this project, but starting at the top of the sheet, the first item we will usually find is information about the architect of record for the project, their address, and phone numbers. Next is the jurisdiction having authority, approval stamp, and initials. If this project was a hospital, there would be an OSHPD seal, and if this project was a school, there would be a DSA seal. The third item is the engineer of records information. Once again, their address and phone numbers. Here in this box would be the list of delta or change order numbers and their dates of approval. This is a critical location to check if things are not lining up with what you are looking at in the field or shop against the drawings, because you just might not have the latest approved set of plans. Now is the project information box, which will state the correct title, in phase or increment of the project, and address. With this box, the actual description of the location that the sheet is viewing or working with is stated. And lastly is the sheet number. As we reviewed earlier, the letter stands for a certain category: structural, architectural, mechanical, etc. And the page number, 1.0, 2.2, 5.6, etc. is given. The last but most important item on the general note sheet is the information for each structural category. Now, if you are looking for an architectural item, you would have to search the general note sheet found in the architectural drawings. But in this seminar, the topic is steel, and we will look closer at that specific topic. We see here on the left side column that with number 3, it covers the steel. So, we see how information specifically for steel is given. We saw earlier in the seminar that the first rule was the approved specifications. And as the quality control and quality assurance professional, if steel is your discipline, you will need to review both of these approved documents for compliance. Some items of interest are base plates leveled on double nuts. All field and shop welding shall have continuous inspection. Notice how the non-frame columns are A992 steel and the moment frame columns are A913. And for the CWI inspector, if you think having a bolting certificate is not important, see how the bolts are A325 or 490. By code, they require continuous inspection. Next, we come across the information on automatic and welded studs. Here are some items of interest. Here is the manufacturer name of headed studs found throughout the industry, the Nelson stud. We see the qualifying of welders will be by the welding inspector. Here is the way the California Building Code is addressed at times, Title 24. We see OSHPD is the jurisdiction having authority for this project. Here is the required testing for daily production of welded studs. So I ask, are these instructions for testing more or less stringent than the code? Why, you may ask? We see how testing must be in accordance with Title 24. The last item for review with the general notes is light gauge steel. Some items of awareness for both the quality control and quality assurance professionals are: the contractor will supply shop drawings for approval. For additional information on headers and jam steel sizes, you would need to move into the architectural drawings. And we see how any deviation with material alteration from these approved drawings need to be submitted as a change order and approved so work will be in compliance. In closing, with the general notes, you see there is plenty of information from simple items as the correct project address to the engineer's fax number, and also specific information for each category, such as different material required for non-moment and moment frame columns. With any project, the first step is to make sure the correct delta or change order is being used, and read the category you're dealing with fully to discover much needed information. We keep moving through the first tool and come to the general details. And if you notice, they can also be called typical details. We see the sheet number S1.2. We will look at some key details that will help with terminology and material assembly, and the first detail will be the typical composite concrete floor construction detail. Here with this detail is a major word that you as a quality control and quality assurance professional must understand to be able to have success in the construction industry, and that word is composite. What is composite construction? It is when you take items such as headed studs, steel beams and columns, concrete, reinforcing steel, fireproofing, and metal decking, all acting as one to allow the forces that are introduced during an earthquake to move through the structure and disperse out through the soil, so we don't have a disaster. Keeping the composite construction theme in play, we take a look at detail number 2, typical floor and roof opening in concrete decks. With this detail, we see how a combination of material from different categories are used together for a simple opening in a concrete deck. First, we see the universal sign for openings through something, which is the X. Next, with this opening, there are the 2 steel beams and the steel angles used to make the actual opening. The next material is the steel decking, and then the reinforcing steel and concrete are added. And with all these components working together, you have a proper opening through a concrete deck that can withstand seismic-induced forces. Now, we move on to the second topic of this segment, which is the views of any set of drawings. We see page S2.21, partial first floor plan. Now, this is the first view, which is known as the plan view. But think of this as a bird flying over the sheet and looking down on it. Here are the items of importance. The building shape, which is somewhat rectangular. Next are the grid lines. From top to bottom are the numbered lines, and from left to right are the lettered lines. And where the 2 lines meet, you have the grid point. Now, as you look around the building, you will see many symbols, schedules, and notes. We will show how to make sense with these items. Okay, with no particular order, we look at the chart on the left side, which for this project is the schedule for the operating room's light booms. Next, we look at this section, which reveals the dimensions for the structural building and a legend box. Now, we will look at this section, the floor and roof framing notes. First item is the elevation for the top of steel. Next is the non-frame column schedule and frame elevation page callouts. We will review these details later in this segment. Here are 3 important symbols for the quality control and quality assurance professionals. Number 6 is the bracing symbol. Number 7 is for special moment frame connections. And number 8 is for beam to column moment connections. These are some more important symbols. Number 9 is for drag cord connections. And number 10 is for headed stud count and location. Number 14 is for moment frame designations located on the plan view sheets. And lastly, this symbol represents the shopped induced beam camber. And the last item is the location or segment of the project floor or level. Now, let's take a closer look at one portion of this project to see how these symbols are used, and also take a look at the second view. Starting with the basics, remember, we are looking down on the project. So here is the column with beams connecting on all 4 sides, with the symbols for special moment frame connections and drag cord beam connections being shown on each side. Next is, how do we know it's a beam? Well, here is the call out for the beam. The W stands for wide flange, and the 24 stands for overall depth of the beam, with the 76 standing for the pound per linear foot of the beam. And the 35 stands for the count of headed stud required on the beam top flange. This symbol is for the diagonal bracing tying the beam to the girder, and if you notice the dash line, it represents that it's under something solid, like the deck slab here in this situation. Here, taking the same rule and reversing it, now when it's solid, as in a line, or in this case a box, it represents that it's coming up at you on top of that solid item, and here again it's the deck slab. We see the call out for the moment frame line and the X symbol showing an opening through the deck slab. Now we see the stairs, and the biggest thing to pick up on is the up and down of the treads. Here we see the down treads of the stairs, then the other down tread again. And the last thing is the second view that is called the cut view. When looking at the symbol from left to right, we see the circle with the detail call out on the top, which is the A, and the sheet number, which is S3.14. Now with this view, you must put yourself on the line and imagine looking the way the arrow at the end of the line is pointing. If you find yourself with no arrow, you could be looking either way. Before moving on, the plan view sheets provide a lot of information, not only with the location, but also for understanding symbols and legends. We enter the last view, which is the elevation view. Typically, a symbol like this represents the elevation view, which directs you to the elevation sheet. And we will look at this detail closer. We see it's frame number 4 on line H, and remember, there always needs to be the opposite grid lines, and we have them here, lines 3, 4, and 5. Next are the levels or floors that this frame wall is found on. Starts at the basement, then runs all the way to the roof. We see the column size callouts, and then the beam callouts. Notice the special moment frame and drag strut connections. Here is a symbol for column splices. And lastly is the call out for the orientation of the columns required for the frame. As with the other two views, the elevation view opens a tremendous amount of information. We now will review very special and unique information for the QC and QA steel professionals, and that is the moment frame column connection notes and details. We start with the welding notes. Here are the general notes for this sheet, and here are some highlighted items. Welders need to be certified by OSHPD. The latest edition of the AWS D11 must be used. Contractor shall provide a field welding sequence and have it approved. And here is what the AISC 9th edition calls jumbo members. Next is specifications for this sheet. A reminder is not to forget the approved specifications that we reviewed earlier, which must also be satisfied. So the question to be answered is, which one is more stringent? Covering items within this sheet specification, here are the minimum requirements for filler metal, the welding procedure specifications, WPS, must be approved by the engineer of record. A pre-construction meeting with the engineer, fabricator, erector, contractor, and inspector shall take place to discuss proper use of WPSs. And here are the requirements for preheat and inner pass temperatures. Now we review the fabrication procedures for these special moment frame connections. We start with the electrodes, which shall be low hydrogen type. Next, we see the flanges need to be welded prior to any shear tabs. Third item is the requirements for the runoff tabs. Here are the steps for welding the bottom beam flange to column flange. Here is the first half requirements for the weld. And here is how to finish the completion of the weld. And we see if any deviation from this procedure is needed, they must be approved prior to welding. To close out these fabrication procedures are K-area requirements, and this covers decreasing residue stresses in weld joint. We now will look at the testing and inspection requirements. Here are some items for both the QC and QA professionals. Shop and field welding shall have continuous inspection. Special inspection shall be approved by OSHPD. Field welds shall be made in accordance with the approved contractor's plan. Notice the 48-hour rechecks of welds on flanges 3 inches and thicker. Here, an alert for all personnel. It's a check for delayed cracking after the structure has been loaded with concrete. The owner will provide the third-party independent testing lab. And it's the contractor's responsibility to provide the testing lab a schedule for proper work coordination. Moving on with the special moment frame specifications, we will review the bolting and detail notes. Let's start with the bolting section first. A quick note on bolts. You have soft bolts and you have high tension bolts, which require extreme different observations. But we will cover these items later in the seminar, so for now try not to worry as some of this stuff seems like Greek. Okay, the bolt material will be A325. Number 2 is calling out the AISC specifications to be satisfied. This is not allowing paint or dirt on the surface of where the bolt will come in contact. And lastly, special inspection is required by the CBC, and continuous inspection is also needed. We move down to the detail notes, and with the first detail note box, the SSDA connection used on this project will cost the contractor $75,000 if and when this detail is used. Not too bad, huh? And this second detail note box is specifying that all notes on this sheet are for the slotted web frame connections. Here is an important table, the pre-qualified WPS requirements. This table works by using both the vertical and horizontal columns to come up with the needed answer. So first, there are vertical columns. Variable, position, weld type, shielded metal arc welding process, submerged arc welding process, gas metal arc welding, and flux core arc welding processes. And the horizontal columns are maximum electrode diameter, maximum current, maximum root pass thickness, maximum fill pass thickness, maximum single pass fillet weld size, and lastly, maximum single pass layer width. Notice the note number. This note are found at the bottom and will always have important information. Before we move on, the X's mean that that section does not pertain to the line items. Let's take a look at the detail for the connection instructions. First thing with this detail of instructions is to understand there are 3 separate sections. First is the actual detail for the required proper slot in the beam web of the full penetration weld connection. Next is the proper way to attach the shear clip to the column that will receive the beam. And lastly are the procedures for the actual construction of full pen connections. Before we leave this detail, we want you to remember this is the slot assembly. There was a reason for remembering that slot assembly, because we will review the schedule for its fabrication requirements. Here's the schedule used for the slot assembly when the J. Allen connection is used. First, what does SSDA stand for? Seismic Structural Design Association. Second, notice there is vertical columns, and horizontal columns. Information in the columns running vertically are beam size, beam span, shear plate, height, width, and thickness, slot length, amount of A325 bolts required, filler weld size at shear clip and beam web connection. The steps are easy enough. Just find the beam size in question and line up with one or all of the vertical columns to find your needed answers. Here's an example. We have a W30 by 132 beam, and you want to know the shear plate thickness used in the J. Allen connection. And it would be 1/2 inch thick. As we pointed out before, always be alerted to footnotes, and here we see the notes provided for the slot assembly. Number 2 states this type of connection is not used on cantilever beams. Look at the tight tolerances on the slot width, length, and K area. Look at the only 2 positions the shear plate can be welded to the column flange in. And the contractor must submit shop drawings containing these slots for approval prior to fabrication. Now, let's look at the slot assembly when the beam is connected to the column. Okay, we have the SSDA beam slot connection detail in front of us, and first you must understand you will need to know how to use the 2 different views that are being called out within this detail. Here's the elevation view, and within this view is the cut view symbol, which is shown here. And lastly are the notes for this detail. To go over a few tools found on this detail that will help finding the answers also are the weld symbol. We will cover these in more depth later in this seminar. Next is the specific detail view call out, which is the upper part of the circle states to look at number 9 detail, and the dashed line in the bottom part of the circle means you stay on the same page as it's found. And lastly is the symbol for full penetration weld connections, which is the same as we reviewed on the plan view earlier in this segment. And the last detail of this SSDA sheet is the doubler and continuity plate connections. Here again we have different scenarios for this detail, but first let's understand the difference between a doubler plate and a continuity plate. They are both found in the same area of the column and beam connection, but basically run different directions. The doubler plate will run vertically on one side or even both sides of the column web, where the continuity plates run horizontally at the beam flanges Okay, moving into this detail, we have the condition for at the top of a column. Next, we have the condition at mid-height of the column. Then, the condition covering sloping continuity plates, while finishing with an offset condition. We will finish the segment with the last tool found in any set of drawings, and that is the specific detail. Here, as the word is stated, specific information is given for a specific location or item. As we saw with the general detail, that information is more of a broad area or situation. We will take a closer look at the non-frame column schedule, and to keep it simple, just remember, if the column is not part of the seismic frame system, it will be found here. Looking at the schedule, you will find the call-out of the actual column running horizontally across the top, and the floors or levels running vertically down the left side. Here are the base plate size and thickness requirements. Notice how each column ends at different floors. The universal symbol for column splices is noted. And remember the rule of solid versus dashed lines. This states the column is behind something solid like a concrete wall. Plus, don't forget your notes. As with all the information we cover in the seminar, there is hours that can be devoted to each code section or drawing detail, but we only have so much time, and the last thing with this segment we would like to review is the non-frame and frame column details. The rule to remember if you get confused about which is which will be to look at the weld required at the flanges. On non-frame columns, you will usually have a partial penetration weld, and on the frame column, you will have a complete penetration weld. If this sounds like Greek again, don't worry, we will cover these terms later in the seminar. We have come to the end of the third rule of the flowchart, the drawings. We review the areas that contain information from who the architect is, to what change order the sheet was approved, to plus tremendous amount of project location information. Next, we cover the tools that the QC and QA professionals need to understand and to use for finding the correct answer to the challenges that will arise on any project, like how grid points work, the plan, elevation, and cut views. Then, we cover the knowledge of the general and specific details and the huge differences in when and where to use them. We have provided a PDF file of the drawings, and if you go to your local Kinko's or Staples, they can print the sheet at a small fee, which you will use to answer the study questions. If any questions arise, we are here to help, so just email us at orangecountyinspections@yahoo.com. When completed, move to segment number 6.